Antietam. I said we would talk about it in the next video. Antietam had even more casualties than Shiloh. It had 12,000 for the North and 14 for the South. And by this point in the Civil War, it was the bloodiest battle, 26,000. If you take our school and you round it down to 1,000, it would be 26 schools that we have that died on the battlefield. And the other thing that began during the Civil War is photography. And so we now have, this is the first war that actual photographs from the battlefield, from the soldiers, that they had embedded reporters traveling, especially with the Northern troops, that photo documented the war. And so in Antietam, there was no clear winner, but because the South decided to retreat, it was considered a Union victory. But Lincoln was very upset with General McClellan. He thought the South is retreating, go after them, make them run, and he didn't. And so Lincoln was done with this general. And as I talked about the strengths that the South had, their leadership was much more aggressive. After Bull Run, Lincoln replaced McDowell with McClellan. And to tell you the kind of how conservative McClellan was, in 7 months he had trained 100,000 soldiers. And so they outnumbered just 15,000 Southern troops. So the odds, just the numbers, far outweighed. The odds were far out, much more, in McClellan's favor. But he was so cautious that he ordered more troops, and he did not pursue the South until he waited until he got more troops. This gave the Confederate more time to build up their troops, and they were able to stop McClellan's advance because he was very timid, very cautious to the point of craziness. And so the Confederate troops stopped McClellan's advance on Richmond, which was the capital for the South. So McClellan, with his 100,000 troops, could have easily overrun the 15,000 and get the capital that would have ended the war. It was a perfect opportunity, and he let it go by. And so this is a photograph of Lincoln talking to McClellan, and Lincoln was extremely frustrated with this. So for many of these battles in the early stages, the South won. The South, they were more passionate. You have generals like McClellan, so that really were not good generals. And the main reason is Robert E. Lee. And even though the North had a larger army and more supplies and better transportation, the passion and the drive and the skill, the strategies, really studying the type of terrain and understanding how to fight really was the benefit of the South. Now, there were not only divisions between the North and the South, those two big areas, but as I had mentioned before, there were some real divisions within the North and South. Not everybody in the North, in the northern states, were against slavery. There were many people in the North who felt that it really talked about other issues and that slavery was okay. In fact, and also in the South, there were states that had strong oppositions to leaving the Union, to separating, to fighting and declaring their independence. So even though the majority on both sides, the North and the South, supported their positions, there were many in the North and South that railed against it. Both sides tried to discourage war. And the people in the North who were against what the North was fighting for, they would encourage soldiers to leave. And soldiers were to desert. And soldiers would desert, on a pretty good scale, because the conditions in the camps and the food and the supplies were horrible. And so in the South, also the people who were against the Southern Rebellion, they would encourage soldiers to desert. And so, to deal with many who were against the war, both President Lincoln and the Confederate president decided to take away a legal right, and it is called habeas corpus. Now, habeas corpus is your legal right, if you are imprisoned, to not just have somebody accuse you of something, throw you in prison. It is the right to be brought to court and have a trial and have evidence presented. Habeas corpus means you can state your case within a court of law. Both the president and the Confederate president suspended or said this will not apply. So to try to prevent people that are in the North to support the South and go against the North, they could be arrested and they could be jailed without a trial. And the Southern president was doing the same thing with people who were against the Southern cause in the South. And so this was a real legal hotbed. As a result, more than 13,000 people were arrested and jailed without ever having a trial. They were accused and then jailed, and that's where they stayed. So make sure you understand what habeas corpus means and how significant it is that both presidents suspended that right of the citizens, which goes absolutely against the Constitution. So, a soldier's life. A soldier's life was very difficult. Soldiers spent 3/4 of their time in camp, and they trained for 10 hours a day. They would eat hardtack. It is a bread. It is a flour and water mixture. They didn't have refrigeration. They didn't have anything like that. How do you serve meat to thousands of soldiers? And so hardtack was a typical meal. Hardtack and coffee, hardtack and water. Many times the hardtack would be infested with bugs. Now, so you're not getting fed well, and a soldier's life requires a lot of energy. In many of the camps, they didn't have clean water. They didn't have sanitary conditions. Your tent would be here, the latrine would be maybe in the woods 50 feet from you. Diseases were rampant, and most times many soldiers were too sick to fight. If you were captured, the conditions in the prisoner of war camps were very equal to what we will study and look at in the Holocaust. This is a soldier from a prisoner of war camp. As many as 100 would die a day. They starved to death, disease took their lives, and this is a very difficult thing to see, but this is a soldier from a prisoner of war camp. And these conditions were both on the North and the South. Were both in the North and the South camps. So, many soldiers towards the middle of the war, in the end, they deserted because the food got worse, the supplies got less, the conditions, and they had seen so many of their colleagues and their friends and their fellow soldiers killed in these huge numbers in these battles that the desertion rate rose significantly as the war went on. We will look at some more of the Civil War in the next video.